right to our south over there. And behind it you can see the Pan Am building, so the contrast I think is very evident. And then if we turn north, here's our row of glass towers. So all of these towers were essentially built after World War II. In 1929, the zoning board allowed for retail and commerce below, retail below 59th Street. So this stretch of Park Avenue had always been residential, but after 1929 it slowly begins to turn commercial. Then of course the Depression halts everything. But with the post-war boom, we see a corresponding boom in construction, skyscraper construction. And Park Avenue is often described as a kind of like urban office park, right? So instead of closed campus, obviously, you have all these towers out. Now, part of Park Avenue, the trees, the landscaping, you know, I mean, Metro North runs underneath Park Avenue, the rails run underneath, so when we talk about electrification of the railroad, this is essentially, this used to be an open cut, right, way back, and now, of course, covered. Park Avenue also has been described as a kind of Corbusian ideal, right, with these kind of quasi-Cartesian towers. Oh, and the reason we stopped here, if you look across the street at 270 Park, this is, well, currently it's JP Morgan, but it was originally the Union Carbide building, designed by Gordon Bunshaft. And now Gordon Bunshaft, if you look down Park, on the west side of Park, you see that greenish blue glass building? So that's Lever House. So Bunshaft designed Lever House, and then Lease designed Seagram, and these two buildings trigger all of these other buildings. So Bunshaft also designed, actually 270 Park, with the kind of glass curtain wall facade. You can see how much lighter it is, by the way, when Sam was talking to us about the brutalism of the Pan Am building and the heavy concrete. Compare that with 270 Park, with Lever House, with the buildings around here. You see that the glass and steel curtain wall buildings are much lighter in appearance, just because you have that expansive glass. Now, anyway, getting back to my original point, a lot of these buildings on Park Avenue have to deal with the railroad. So 270 Park is one of the better known ones, where the lobby actually is on the second floor. You have escalators going up. They couldn't run the elevator equipment in the lobby because the switching equipment and the railroad equipment interfered. The electrical systems were in the way, so they had to raise everything. You take an escalator up. The lobby's on the second floor. This has often been described, this building, as sort of a pretty good knockoff of, you know, the style of architecture, even though Bunshaft designed both of them. Critics, this hasn't received as favorable a critical reception, but it's considered to be fairly good. Now, Ada Louise Huxtable wrote, in 1957, she wrote a piece on what she called the Park Avenue School of Architecture. And she was writing about this new crop of buildings. And I think what's important is that she was cautioning not to mistake a lack of ornament with a lack of character. And I think that, you know, Park Avenue often gets a bad rap from a lot of people as like, oh, this sort of corporate, faceless collection of buildings. And while I do agree that a lot of these buildings are not that great and kind of heavy and disproportionate, many of them actually are quite successful in terms of proportion, in terms of how they handle the materials of the facade, in terms of just the overall treatment of the building. And so I think it's important to look beyond just the kind of very post-war modern aesthetic, you know, that so often dismissed, especially, you know, when you have, I mean, they're new, and in New York we tend to, we like things new, but then we also tend to critique the new. So it's a different style, and Huxtable argued for evaluating these buildings on their own, according to their own standard. And she kind of talks about some of them, yes, they can be dull, they can be monotonous, but many of them are just very elegant. Sort of this elegant simplicity can be seen with these buildings along Park Avenue. Something that I will say is there is a kind of disconnect as we stand in this city of towers between the corporate offices of these buildings and what they're actually producing. Now today there's a lot of banks, bank headquarters, financial headquarters in these buildings, but Union Carbide was a chemical company. Lever House manufactured soap, right? So that the stuff they're producing is a heavy, they're producing this in factories, it's heavy industry, but then you have these kind of clean, sparkling buildings, and I think it's interesting to think about the disconnect between the corporate headquarters, the manufacturing, and that urban geography also, that Midtown Manhattan is the place for the glossy glass towers, and then now, I mean, these companies didn't necessarily have facilities in New York, but let's say, for example, the edges of Brooklyn, the edges of Queens are the places for manufacturing. So different zones within the city, even for the same company, the same entity. Okay. Any questions? Okay, let's go up to Lever House.